What's up, everybody? This is Kurt Dimer, and you're watching Aftershocks TV. Peace and love.
All right, we got Aftershocks TV. We are back, and hey, look at this. We got my co-host Chris Aiken here, and we got my other compadre here who was doing this ASTV with me last year, Mr. Tom Brennan. What's going on, Tom? How you doing?
Yeah, man, you got the token leprechaun back, so looking forward to the discussion, talking shit. I even wore my Diamond Head T-shirt. Look at that.
Look at that. All right.
Wow. That's actually from, I'm not going to turn around, but that's, I saw Diamond Head on their reunion tour 1991 in Nottingham Rock City in the UK, and it still fits, fuckers. See?
That's from 91, that shirt?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, wow. You still got it intact.
So there you go, man. I showed Bob Nalbany and that he was well impressed.
Look at that. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, 30-something-year-old shirt to still, that thing to be still in condition to be worn. That's good, man. Good. Kudos for you. Yeah.
That's it. Sean Harris and Brian Tatler up on the stage on their last go-around, so that was something to see.
Hell yeah, that's awesome,
man.
Yeah, man.
Fantastic. Well, guys, thanks for coming. Obviously, so this is going to be a little bit of a different sort of thing we're doing with Aftershocks. It's called our Vintage Standard Series. So everyone, obviously listens to the show knows we love talking about new music and what's going on in today's music business and the news and all that stuff. But after doing I hadn't done it about 4 months until me and Chris, restarted it last month. And I was kind of just looking back. The last episode we did, Chris, before the hiatus, was the one about Christian Older Wolvers. And that was pretty fiery, obviously, of an episode.
What?
To say the least, right? So, I mean, but just looking back and afterwards, it was like, we spend a lot of time talking about serious things, on Aftershocks.
Sure.
So, all the news, all the business and stuff all the time. So I wanted to definitely do something that's a little more celebratory. Since we're not, we're just always serious. I want to do something a little more fun. So we wanted to start this thing up, but we're just going to kind of go into talking about, some classic records that were very influential, obviously, on a lot of, musicians over the years. This way, it's not all this doom and gloom that, usually Aftershocks kind of tends to kind of go towards,
Sure.
They're not really purposely we do it that way, but it just happens. But I wanted to purposefully have something where we're talking about something fun and more celebratory. And we're going to start, like I said, with this whole Vintage Standard Series. So the first, our first episode here on that is going to be, we're going to be talking about a record, as you guys know, I've been doing this film called Lifers, and one of the guys we have in it, Trevor Church, his dad, so Trevor obviously has a band called Haunt and this other band Beastmaker that he's done.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So his dad is Bill the Electric Church, and Bill Church is, played on a lot of classic records, this guy, one being obviously a Van Morrison record, the Tupelo Honey is probably his biggest record, of all time. But in terms of hard rock and metal, he was also, the basis for the first and the classic Montrose record.
Right.
Bill the Electric Church, obviously. And this album, I'm going to bring it up real quick on our screen here. Obviously, it's interesting. I didn't really realize that is it true, Tom? I'm going to put this up, but is it a different cover in the UK? It is, right?
Yeah, it's a big busty blonde in the European version. I mean,
right?
That one right there is a load of dudes with the tops off, so that's kind of uncomfortable. But
there's a different one with some chick or something.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah,
yeah,
that's right. Completely different cover. Mm-hmm.
I didn't notice that, man. I mean, I didn't hear about it, I should say, because I've never seen that. This is the only one we know of. But I did read today when I was doing all this that in the UK it was a different cover. But yeah, I mean, this is obviously. It's one of those records where, I didn't become privy to this record until, I wouldn't say it was that long ago, maybe about within the last 15 years. I didn't really even know much about Montrose, to be honest with you. Other than that, obviously, it was Sammy Hagar's first, band. But other than that, I didn't really know how, influential they were. I did know that I knew, Eddie Van Halen was very influenced by Ronnie Montrose, and just Van Halen in general, we're big fans of it. But in terms of the impact it had, it's one of those things when I do listen back to it, I do, and we'll get into this in a little bit here, this discussion, but I mean, I hear some stuff in there that I'm like, yeah, okay, I can hear that in other people's, bands and songs and so forth. But just to give a little backdrop on this, obviously it came out in 1973. One of the first things that stands out to me, it's a platinum record, which is funny because yeah, this record didn't peak, and this is the reason why probably I didn't hear of it, and a lot of other people didn't until later on. It only peaked when it came out at number 133 on the Billboard 200, yet it went platinum. Now, my only thing I could think of was when I looked at it, it did go platinum in 86, and so that means to me is that everyone picked up the record once Sammy Hagar was in Van Halen.
Right.
Is what I'm thinking, obviously. But so yeah, let's start, Chris, start with you. Talk to us about this record, what you know about it, if influenced you and so forth.
I had it. It was one of the very first records that I ever actually owned, actually. Okay. I was the first Sammy Hagar anything that I owned was Standing Hampton.
Okay.
But when I got Standing Hampton, I loved it so much that then I went back and got everything else that Sammy Hagar did. Okay. And this was one of the first ones I got, and I played this thing to death. It's so catchy. Obviously Rock Candy's on it, and Bad Motor Scooter's on it, and Space Station Number 5 is a great one. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great music on it. The thing that's surprising to me is how old it was. That was always the thing that surprised me, because it really was heavy for rock, for what rock was in 1980. I don't know, maybe 3 when I got it officially. And, that's 10 years after it came out. And it came out in a time when, what was on the radio at the time? The Eagles and Bob Dylan and, not anything like this. Anything like this would be relegated to late night to be played next to Blue Cheer and Black Sabbath. And, but I just love it. I even today I pull this one out, and I don't listen to much old, like real old music. I usually hate the production of it, so I don't usually go and listen to it. This is one that I still go out and pull pretty regularly and listen to. It's a great record.
Great record. Tom, so in Ireland, was this a record very well known? I know they toured over there. Sammy was big, I know. He toured a lot in the UK, but Montrose at all? Did you grow up with this at all? Was this in your wheelhouse at all or no? Tom, you're on mute.
Yeah, there you go. There you get this fucking thing. The dog's barks, I put her on mute from time to time. But, yeah, don't even edit that out. Leave it in. But
of course.
Yeah. No, for me, no. I probably discovered this similar to you, Matt. 15 years, 10 years ago, whatever it was. And again, I was, reading Kerrang magazine when Sammy joined Van Halen, and then you start looking back on his, discography. You didn't have Wikipedia then, so it was all print media. So you had to go looking for it. True. So I think the first time I heard it, whenever it was 10 years ago, but I still never went after it. I didn't go seek it out. It was only when I just started getting, Spotify and the music became more accessible. I couldn't believe when I heard it. First of all, it was 1973, and that Chris pointed out that because it's production, but the production of this is awesome. Of course, Ted Templeman. We could do a whole podcast just on him. And to your point, Matt, like this did not hit. This was a sleeper record. It was like the Shawshank Redemption of records. Nobody gave a shit about it when it came out, and it became a classic as the decades rolled by, and it got launched really. Because it's no coincidence that, Sammy joined Van Halen in 85 and hey, a year later it's platinum. Because I think what happened is that people went after it, sought it out, and said, holy shit, this is big. And then a big word of mouth campaign probably happened after that even though social media wasn't alive. But like those songs, I saw Sammy, as I was speaking to Chris a moment ago, like a couple of months ago in Nashville, and they're still playing shit off that album. Like he did like a little medley of Montrose shit, and it's just so freaking good for its time. Sure. And you listen to the song Rock Candy, that could be Warrant from 1984. This is 10 years previous to that. Yeah. So, a lot of people say the blueprint for the 80s scene and, LA and all that shit was Van Halen in 78, 79, of course, and it was. But you can see the breeding ground for that music was right here.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that was going to be my next point. Many of the critics over the years consider this the first really American heavy metal record. Yeah. Now, at first I was, obviously when we say metal, we're talking about like proto metal, you know what I mean? And so I was thinking to myself like, nah, there's no way. But when I went and did some research, I think it really, it might be, because if you think about it, okay, when you think about okay, even the proto metal bands. Okay, you said as we know, most of those proto metal bands, all the bigger ones, obviously were from the UK. Okay, they weren't here from America. If you look at the American now proto sort of metal bands, you're looking at bands like, a lot of those, New York, Long Island bands, Mountain and Cactus and Vanilla Fudge and Blue Oyster Cult, right? They were up there, Dust and those kind of bands. And out here on the West Coast, you had Blue Cheer, as Chris mentioned earlier, Captain Beyond. But Captain Beyond, you could say, well, I mean, they were, basically Iron Butterfly with, Deep Purple is basically what it was on vocals. But those bands, if you listen to them, they had more of that 60s sort of blues influence, like the Sabbath blues influence, right? Where really Montrose, if you listen to this record, and like you just, you were referring to Tom, but you listen to those bands in the 80s, the LA bands, the LA metal bands, much more influenced by Montrose than any of those other bands I just mentioned. A great example I'll give you here is, two songs I'll bring out. So Bad Motor Scooter. All you got to do, obviously, listen to the beginning of that song. What does it remind you of when you hear the beginning of that, of an 80s band? It sounds like the beginning of Kickstart My Heart, right?
Yeah,
it's like basically a blatant ripoff of it, really.
Yeah.
And if you listen to Rock Candy, what does Rock Candy remind you of?
For me, it's like any 80s band. It's like a Poison, a Warrant, anything in there.
Well, I'll tell you right now, this right, Hot, Sweet, and Sticky, right? They sang. Yeah. Well, the song "Sticky Sweet" from Motley Crue is pretty much a blatant ripoff of freaking Rock Candy. I mean, you listen to that riff; it's almost the same thing.
Come on, Motley Crue didn't rip anybody off.
No, yeah.
Nikki Sixx is an honorable gentleman. God damn it.
Yeah, sure, exactly, yeah. But yeah, but it really is. The more I thought about it I'm like, this probably was really the first American metal record, if you really want to look at that. The metal that we wound up knowing it to be in the 80s, I should say.
You know what, Matt? I think that's one of the reasons it wasn't a success, because Warner Brothers at the time, and I did read up on this, they didn't know what to do with them.
Yeah.
Like they had the Doobie Brothers and Deep Purple and
exactly.
Whoever else was going out. They were putting all their dollars into these guys, and then they heard this and went, so what do we call this? Where do we categorize it? What section do we put it into? So if you can't market it, you can't sell it. If you can't sell it, then they're just going to go by the wayside. That's why it sold shit at the start. I know they had their popularity period from 75 to 77, and then everything went to shit after that. But this album did nothing, like absolutely zero. And yet here we are in 2024 talking about what a classic it is, because it's a sleeper record. And then a lot of people like me and our age group, because we're similar, went back and discovered it because we started reading about Ted Templeman and Don Landy and people like that, going, who the fuck are these guys? And then we had to go back, and then we went 73. What the fuck? It's unbelievable. It's like it's 51 years old as we speak. It's unbelievable record for that time.
Sure. Well, and I'll tell you what the irony is to this record specifically is that I honestly, just like we've been saying here, it got discovered because of Sammy Hagar. I don't think there's any argument about that. But if you really look at Sammy Hagar's career, this record's all about Ronnie Montrose, because when he left Montrose, he did 5 records, 5 that did nothing.
Was that the Gamma band he had, right?
Yeah. Well, he had Sammy Hagar, 9 on a 10 scale, musical chairs.
Yeah, okay.
But he had some songs that were so good with Montrose. The minute he got out of Montrose, now this is a guy that has had a humongous solo career, but he had 5 albums, 5 albums of songs that didn't impact at all after having success. Yep. That pretty much tells you he wasn't the guy. He was not the creative guy in that band. He gets a lot of that credit for it. You don't hear a lot of people talking about Ronnie Montrose. But Montrose, to me, was the guy, was the creative force behind this more than Sammy, even though Sammy gets all the credit for it.
Yeah, I know, and I agree with you 100% on that. Point. Yeah, I mean, because Sammy. Well, first of all, the only song that Hagar wrote really was "Bad Motor Scooter," which it was their, probably
song,
yeah. After Rock Candy, it was their second biggest hit on the record. But yeah, listen, Montrose, reading up about him, he was just one of those guys, obviously like you said, he influenced, you're right. Though. Like I said, I didn't really even hear of him until like about 15 years ago. Like I said, I didn't even know about him. So, I've been following this, rock and metal my whole life. So it's an interesting that he is a very under the radar guy, even though a lot of these, like I said, Van Halen, that was his main influence, supposedly.
Sure.
I think
and there's a lot of those guys too. Leslie West comes to mind real quick.
Agreed.
Leslie West was a legend if you knew, but how many people know?
Exactly.
How many people could name anything past Mississippi Queen?
Well, and
not many.
Well, I think if you look at a lot of these proto metal bands, the thing is, it wasn't just even Montrose. I didn't even know of half of these Captain Beyonce stuff until, like I said, I really started getting into a lot of that stoner, proto metal music,
Sure.
and I discovered a shitload of these bands from the 70s that just never took off commercially, but that musically are fucking outstanding. A lot of those bands. So I mean, I think Montrose is one of them, and obviously, I think because when we think of metal, when people usually think of metal, I mean, if you think of this time, 73, this stuff was, like you said, they didn't know what to do with it. It was heavy. They don't know what to do with this kind of stuff back then, and so obviously, we didn't really become privy to these bands until the bands we liked were influenced by them. I mean, that just and obviously, this album and like all these other proto metal albums just got bigger and bigger as these bands got older. Because obviously people just went back and discovered all these unknown, hidden gems like a Montrose. Right? Although this wasn't hidden, like I said, it is a platinum record. But
it wasn't platinum at the. I think you have to put the asterisk
Hagar,
on it. It was not platinum when they were a band.
No, of course not.
When they were a band, I doubt it was gold.
No,
it was just a record that came out. And thinking about the record companies, and I'm trying to think, 73, I was like 5, so I don't even remember that. As the old guy here in the room, I don't remember that.
I wasn't even born.
That's what I'm saying. When I look at that, though, and I try to think what was happening at the time, that was the earliest incarnations of Journey. That was before, like, Foreigner. Santana was a big deal, I think, at that time.
Led Zeppelin ruled the world.
Led Zeppelin did, but these guys weren't going to be played at the same thing as Zeppelin.
No.
The audiences wouldn't match. They really didn't have a place to fit because, and that's probably why it didn't work, because I think all three of us have seen Sammy Hagar perform in some band. And the guy's a great performer. Like, he's a great performer. Always has been. His charisma would have got him over if he was on a good tour. But for whatever reason, in 1973, he wasn't on any tour that was big enough to catapult this band with all these great songs.
Was that his debut hit, Sam?
That was. Yep.
Yeah, so he was a nobody. And he was a Sam Hagar, not Sammy, because Sammy did as years went by or whatever. So Sam was like some dude working in a coffee shop, so they changed that up. But I think when Bill Graham became the manager 75 or something, that's when because he had that's when they got popular. I think did they hit, I don't know if they hit platinum with some of the records after that. I don't
believe they have. I mean, I don't believe so.
And I don't think Sammy was in there. Sammy wasn't in the band in 75. He
was only on the first two, right? And then
he was on
the other guy.
Paper Money and Montrose.
Yeah, that's right. That was the second album. You're right. Yeah. And then they had the next one was Presenting Montrose, whatever. But they got popular in 75 to 76 because Bill Graham was involved. Obviously, he had a big name manager, and about him with the US Festival or the US Festival in '83 or whatever. But they never really, like, to your point, Chris, I think is a great point. They were never a big band whilst they were together. They got that notoriety as the years went by, and we've said it 1,000 times. If Sammy hadn't joined Van Halen, would this be a platinum record today? No, I don't think it would.
I don't think it would, and I'll tell you one other quick reason why. Sorry, Matt.
That's okay.
Sammy was having huge success before he joined Van Halen, and it wasn't a platinum record. I mean, let's not forget, I Can't Drive 55 was monstrous. That was a huge, huge, huge song and huge MTV video. So, VOA was a big record for him. As was Standing Hampton. Standing Hampton had 3 or 4 big hits on it. And even with that, nobody was going back and pulling Montrose. And that was only, 5-6 years earlier at that point.
Well, the thing is, too, Montrose, so both, Ronnie Montrose and Bill Church, I mean, remember, too, now this is really kind of considered, this was a band that was made up of studio musicians because Ronnie Montrose was a session guy. He played with Edgar Winter and he played with Van Morrison, and so did Bill Church. And so these guys, and you know how they felt, the critics back then, those labels and critics were about session studio musicians, man. To them, they weren't real musicians.
Yeah.
So another reason why I think this probably didn't get pushed enough is made up of a bunch of session guys, and maybe that was a reason too, or that got kind of put to the side. But and then Ronnie, of course, was just known as a recluse. He was just one of those guys. He loved, I got this. This is a great book. I'm going to do a plug here for, it's Bill the Electric Church, Martin Popoff. So all you Skull Session fans out there, it talks about it in there. He was a big, camper and hunter. He, a big, obviously drinker. It's what pretty much killed him. And he was a bit of a recluse. He wasn't a guy that really knew or enjoyed being in the limelight. Didn't know how to really handle success. Like a lot of we've seen a lot of musicians do over the years. So I think that's one of the reasons why he just was that guy, even though he was known as just this, guitar whiz. Other than a handful of maybe some the guys like we said, Eddie Van Halen's or some of the '80s guitarists. You never really heard about Ronnie Montrose. You never really heard about this band, and so
who else, Matt and Chris? Who else was out there like this in '73? Whether it was in the UK, obviously the UK or the US, like who was there? Here?
Well, I would say, like I said, there was no one really here in the States. The bands I would say over the UK. I compare when I listen to Montrose to one band they remind me of is Nazareth. They had that kind of sound. You know what I mean? That like straightforward kind of rock sound, little rock sound.
Was April Wine or
they were around about then? That's similar to. They were a little bit later though in the 70s.
Uriah Heep.
Yeah, Uriah Heep was there.
Possibly Uriah Heep. I think April Wine
was a little bit later. I think.
Yeah, a little later. They hit harder, faster than what 79.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think off the top. And again, I was 5.
I mean.
Mata Hoople.
But we're struggling to find somebody. That's my point. Who is it?
Yeah. And that's what made me realize that yes, American-wise, this probably was the first really metal album. I mean, it's really, like I said, I did research into that, and other, like I said, then, like I said, those bands, the Cactus and Blue Oyster Cult and stuff. There was no one else that was really doing that here in the States. That had that Zeppelin, influence what they were playing, and that Montrose was doing.
And it was too early for Kiss, so Kiss had all like pop.
Yeah, no, it had nothing to do with that.
They didn't break for another 2 years after that, so they weren't involved.
Exactly.
I just pulled up the 40 greatest records of 1973 rock records, and it's all kind of that sort of
bluesy
country rock. It's the Allman Brothers. Mata Hoople, John Lennon, Chicago. It's nothing like Montrose in here.
Are Montrose in there? Are they in that list?
I'm looking right now. Queen is in here.
Yeah.
Steely Dan, Ringo Starr.
Yeah, it was more progressive stuff going on at the time too. I think. So Montrose, classic record though. Great stuff.
It is number 17, by the way.
Okay, so it's there. Okay, so someone has some sense.
Okay,
it's a great record.
Great record, absolutely.
I had an interest in music always.
It's always kind of been around me some way, shape, or form.
5 minutes sitting on a drum set, man, change your life.
This is the same black guitar that Marty McFly plays in Back to the Future.
I love the feeling I get in front of the freaking full stack here, just the vibration or something to it.
I'm lucky because I do have a little bit of a tap into the Fu Manchu lore, into the Nebula lore. In order to keep things going, you kind of have to start playing the game a little bit, the business game.
Everybody has to get through a day-to-day, and how do you exist and how do you get by?
As far as getting people to commit to bands, it's tough to keep a lot together these days, for sure.
Still sleeping on people's floor, that's still a reality.
Probably also playing with some of the best people I've ever played with. The creative juices don't stop. It just keeps going.
For me, it's just finding a balance of how much time I'm spending with my family versus how much time I'm spending working.
It's this validation that what you're doing actually has merit.
Obviously, we're a little long in the tooth, And we've been doing this for a minute, and now we can kind of do what we want. We don't need a record company. I'll do it myself. I'll do it the way I want to.
Just always be cool. Just be respectful. Those are your people. They're connecting to you on some level, even if they don't look like you.
It's got to happen, you know, or else I'll go crazy. Go crazy one way or another, you know. I might as well, you know, not go crazy if I can play music.
Maybe one day I'll have a Porsche, but you know, until that day, I'll drive a Chevy.
There you go.
All right.